Thank you. So what is this thing? This is a musical instrument that I've been developing over the last 2 years. It's called the Glide. And it's, hardware standpoint, it's actually fairly simple. It's 3 buttons in this hand, 2 buttons in this hand. There's a thumbstick, there's a function button, there's an on-off switch. That's about it. Inside is a microcontroller that has all the code, and in both hands are accelerometers, which measure acceleration. But why would you invent a musical instrument? Well, let me go back and talk about that. I'm a guitarist primarily, like Chris was saying, and I also teach guitar. And one thing I've noticed over the years of teaching is that all of my students, to one degree or another, will struggle with position, posture, anatomy issues, getting sore, getting tired, that sort of thing. And I kind of wondered why that is. And I started to think about it. Guitar is actually kind of an awkward instrument to play, like an acoustic guitar specifically. You think about your right hand is kind of over this box. You make this motion kind of like this. Your left hand is kind of tucked under like this. You move your fingers like that. And I wondered, why is that? And I realized that the problem is that the design of the guitar is centered around a string that's at tension. Okay, so meaning that you have a string, you tighten it up, you have 6 strings, and then you play the guitar by manipulating those 6 strings at tension. Well, for a string to be at tension, it has to be perfectly straight. Okay, and whenever it's perfectly straight, well, that means that this arm needs to be a little uncomfortable, and this arm needs to be a little uncomfortable also. Okay, and then I started thinking about it, and I realized all acoustic classical instruments are like this to one extent or another. You think about like the flute, with your head kind of tilted over and your arm back like this. You have the violin where where the entire instrument is pinched between your shoulder and your chin. A lot of instruments you can't move at all. The pipe organ or the piano, you need a team of guys to move around. The bass instruments are the worst. You have the tuba with just tons of metal tubing. You have the double bass, which is like a 7-foot wooden sculpture that you try to play. And I actually injured my back with the double bass, not by playing it, but by moving one. I was trying to get into my car and throw my back. So, make sure it's still on. So the problem that I've found is that musical instruments are not designed for human beings. What they're designed for is to make noise, and then they're altered just enough so that a human, if they work at it, practice at it for years and years and years, then they can actually make music with it. So I thought, what if we had an instrument that instead of being acoustic-centric, that it was human-centric instead. And I thought about, again, with the guitar. So with the right hand, instead of having the right hand way over like this, making the strumming motion like this, what if you turned it like this and made a motion like that? What if the left hand, instead of being tucked over like this, you just came out like this or like that? This is a lot more natural, and it feels a lot better. And you don't get tired after playing for a little while because you can move it around to different places. You don't have to be set in one position while you play. And so after going through all that, I was like, I should design an instrument. So I had 3 primary musical goals that I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to have something that had the rhythm of a guitar, that had the expressiveness of the human voice, and had the learning curve of a piano. And what I mean by that is guitar is a great rhythm instrument because you have this big motion. That kind of thing. you have this big motion that you can make, and you get this pendulum kind of feeling. And there are not any, that I know of, not any melodic instruments that give you that same kind of feeling. There are percussion instruments, but not melodic instruments. But then with the human voice, that was my next goal. I wanted something that was as expressive as the human voice. Well, the human voice, what it does is you start a note, and then you can change the volume, you can add vibrato, you can change the pitch. Like that. Thanks. And then lastly, I wanted the learning curve of a piano. And if you've never played an instrument, or you've never taught an instrument, most instruments have fairly difficult learning curves. Again, kind of going back to the violin, with the violin, you have to be playing for probably 3 years or so before you start to sound good. And if you've noticed, any good violinist, any professional violinist, 99% of them started when they were adults, all right? And the theory as to why that is that, you know, whenever we're little kids, we have, you know, high brain plasticity. We can learn things very quickly. When you become an adult, we can't learn anything anymore. You know, can't teach an old dog new tricks, that kind of thing. I have a slightly different theory. I think that whenever you're a kid, you have no idea how terrible you sound when you play the violin. And so you're just, like, all right, that was fun. I'll practice again tomorrow. And when you're an adult, and after 6 months, you're like, no, I'm done. I'm going to go play the piano. But the piano, contrasting with that, has a wonderful learning curve. You have a bunch of, you know, keys that are finger-sized. You have these white keys, and with just the white keys, you can play thousands of melody lines. When you start getting bored with that, you can add in the accidentals. You can add in other notes, and you do a lot of different things. So it has this great learning curve where every hour you put in, you get an hour of benefit from it. Okay, with violin, it's like for those first 3 years, it's like you put in an hour, you get 2 minutes of benefit. All right. I feel like I'm trashing the violin. I love the violin. It's beautiful. So how would you do that with an instrument? Well, this is code-based. And so what I can do is I can actually turn on and off features so that you can do easy things at first. So you can just go up to it and go. And then once you get kind of bored with that, well, let's turn on another feature. And then you go. That's like the fancy Mary Had a Little Lamb. So those are my musical goals. Rhythm of a guitar, expressiveness of the human voice, and learning curve of a piano. But all of that was underneath a larger umbrella goal, which was accessibility. And again, going back to my students that I've had over the years, accessibility is something that affected all of them. You know, some of them really had to struggle to pay for lessons, all right? Some of them really had to struggle to pay for instruments. Some of them did not have perfect anatomy. You have to have, 4 highly functional fingers on one hand and at least 2 or 3 highly functional fingers on the other hand in order to play guitar. Violin, again, is, kind of murder in that regard. You have to have absolutely perfect anatomy in order for you to be able to play violin well. So with this instrument, it's buttons. It's just little buttons and it's big arm motions. It's not a lot of micro motions involved. So, and then also, I'm actually planning on releasing the source code in a few years for this, and people will be able to alter it so that maybe someone can take this exact same code and they can make an instrument maybe using like a keyboard and pedals and a breath control, something like that, so that you might not even need to have 2 arms in order to play it. So where you can make music when that might have not have been an option before. And then lastly, financial. This thing's cheap. like I said, the hardware is pretty cheap. This is a prototype. Prototypes are always more expensive than the final thing. The parts for this prototype are less than $100. And then I think the production version of it should be, significantly cheaper than that. So I want to have an instrument where the next Jimi Hendrix out there can see a video on YouTube, say, that's cool, and then he can actually buy one and afford it. And it's not like a toy version. Since this is code-based, it's going to have all the same code as like a professional version. And so you're not going to have to save up money for 10 years in order to buy your nice instrument. You can have the nicest instrument in the world right at your fingertips for not a lot of money, which I think would be great. So I want to end this by playing the second half of the piece that I started this out with. I was fortunate enough to be in a musical instrument competition a few weeks ago. It's called the Super Bowl of musical instrument competitions, the Guthman Musical Instrument Competition down at Georgia Tech. And there were a lot of really cool instruments, a lot of great ideas, and it really made me optimistic about the possibilities for the future whenever it comes to making music and accessibility. And that's what this is all about. We want to make instruments that will make music accessible for everyone. So here we go. Thank you.